Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am BorderWise and welcome back to From the Depths and 2021, if you're watching this in 2021. If you're watching this in a year other than 2021, greetings from the past. But anyway, today we have something that I have covered before on the channel, but it needed a bit of an updated tutorial, and so here is an updated Armour tutorial for From the Depths. So we're going to be going over how Armour works, the materials used for Armour, a few handy formulas for Armour, and just very briefly some good practices to use when armoring your craft. So to start off with is a formula. And good news about Armour, it is simpler than it used to be, because the Armour formula is basically for a weapon, be it a projectile or an energy weapon, for full damage, its armor piercing, or AP value, must match or exceed the armor class of the block it's hitting, which is AP. So, for example, we have over here this not particularly good APS shell at 500mm. It's just a sabot head with 3 gunpowder. It's got an armor piercing value of 39.1, which means if we're shooting at metal, for instance, which has armor of 40, it does not do quite full damage, and in order for it to do full damage to metal, we might need to do something like, I don't know, add a little bit of railgun draw, just to get it, whoops, let's go like that, maybe 200, 300, 310, 320, 330, there we go. So now, with just a wee bit of extra rail juice, this shell would do full damage to metal, assuming it's not stacked. And onto that right now. So, From the Depths has, broadly speaking, 2 kinds of blocks. There are structural and non-structural blocks, and the only real difference between the two is structural blocks are materials that can give an armor bonus to the block in front of them if that one also is a structural block. So basically what that means is that you will notice, see, we're here looking at metal, look at this metal block. It has armor 40, and it says in the tooltip, structurally sound adds armor to other structural blocks, and max structural armor boost is +8. So it is the maximum armor boost that a metal block, and it doesn't matter how big the metal block is +8, as opposed to, say, wood, which has considerably less armor. It can give a maximum of +1.6, but you look for that tooltip. So it's structurally sound adds armor to other structural blocks. Something like, say, ERA. Oh no, ERA does have that. I keep forgetting about ERA because ERA short version is generally useless, but say you look at a connector, an AI connector, it doesn't have that tooltip, so that's how you can tell. All structural blocks are on this first tab here with blocks. And so we're just going to quickly run through the things that you would most commonly use for armor. And yes, ERA, well, it counts as a structural block, but at the same time, even if it does do that, it is horribly useless, and so we're not going to talk about it. Well, we just did, but that's it. So we're going to go, we're going to run down through the structural materials in order from most cheap to most expensive. And these are the things that you will probably most commonly use in the structural integrity of your craft. As in, these are the blocks that are going to make up the vast majority of your craft's mass, or at the very least, its armor. So to start off with, we have wood, old reliable, and to sum up wood in brief, it floats, it is cheap, it is by far the cheapest structural block in the game. You can see here that a single wooden block costs 1 material. It is in fact kind of the it's kind of the cost which everything else is derived from. And yeah, it's just super cheap, it floats very well, so it's got positive buoyancy. You'll see here on the wood block it has a relative buoyancy of plus 27.7, which means it's only slightly less buoyant than just an empty space with an air pump in it, so that's this thing. And so yeah, it's also EMP resistant. So you'll see here in the tooltip it says EMP damage reduction is 100 per meter. That means that if you have, say, an EMP missile that does 1000 EMP damage, basically if it passes through 10 meters of wood, it's basically gone. It's like it cannot get through it because all its charge is like lost completely. So wood is good for EMP proofing, and it's cheap EMP proofing at that, so that's quite nice. And next, moving on, is stone. And stone has similar advantages to wood. It does not float. It has negative buoyancy, but it's almost neutral, so minus 1.7, which means if you build, let's go over here, new blueprints, vehicle, and say we go here, and we replace that with stone, you'll see that this thing does sink, but it sinks very slowly. Because it basically, well, it's a buoyancy, like negative 1.7 is almost neutral, and so you just add a wood block to that, and the thing floats. So, handy to know. It is quite a bit tougher than wood, so you'll see here just the wood block. It has 250 health, 16 armor, as opposed to wood, which is 180 health, 8 armor, and like twice the armor already. But it's also EMP resistant. It is as much EMP resistant as wood is, so both of them have a kind of similar role in being cheap, EMP resistant. It's just that stone is not buoyant, and it's just a lot tougher in general. And by the way, I remember I used to think that it was unrealistic that you could use stone to make ships and stuff like that, except people have done that in real life. Which makes sense, because if you can make a ship out of iron, you can make it out of stone. It's like, it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's just metal is more malleable and easier to work, but From the Depths doesn't have that problem. And speaking of easy to work, we now have lead. So lead is an interesting block. It is tougher than it used to be. But yeah, it's somewhat between wood and stone in terms of durability, so it actually has more health than stone, which is quite interesting to me. But yeah, so its main job is that it's heavy. That's its main thing. You'll notice it has absolutely terrible buoyancy, is minus 158.7. That is deliberate. This is, well, it says in the tooltip, perfect for keels and counterbalances, purposely heavy. So if you, for instance, let's do the new vehicle thing again. Go over here. Whoop. So say you have something like this, and very tall, and it's just going to tip over, and you don't want that. And what you can do is that you can stick a bit of lead on the bottom of it. Ta-da! And now it's staying nice and stable in the water because it's weighed down, and basically drops the center of mass a lot. So that's basically how keels work. Like, it is generally the best thing for keels if you don't want to use more expensive materials. More on that in a hot second. And moving along the list here we have reinforced wood, which is an interesting block because it's honestly mostly for decoration. It's pretty functional decoration. It is halfway between wood and metal in terms of the way it's used, and also it's just all its stats. So it's got positive buoyancy, plus 13, so not super buoyant. So you look at wood, plus 27.7, this is plus 13, not as buoyant. Significantly more expensive than wood, it's 3 times as expensive. Quite a bit tougher, a lot more health, a lot more armor, heavier as well. It has about half the EMP damage reduction, so it's not as good as wood or stone for EMP proofing. But it's kind of a jack of all trades block. It's actually quite handy with that. But its main use is, it is a decking piece that combines the look of wood with some of the protections and metal. This was originally added to the game because people wanted to make World War II era looking vessels that have wooden decks, but the problem is wood is quite flimsy, and so they wanted something a little bit tougher, and that's what this is. So it actually, that's it tends to work quite well for its intended purpose. It is deck armor. So yeah, it's like reinforced decking, it's decent cheap armor, and metal is what you're probably going to be using for the most part for armors, because it's just good all-round, good compromise between being quite tough but also affordable. So it's just that's what it is. That's its main job. It has the same relative buoyancy of stone, so minus 1.7, so it's almost neutral, but it will sink. It's got pretty darn good armor, 40, good health, like metal beams. Particularly like 4-meter beams tend to be quite good. Just for general armor purposes, there's not much else to say about it. It is worth mentioning that blocks that do not have that EMP damage reduction tag in their tooltip, they don't reduce the damage of EMP passing through them. So EMP will retain its damage when it channels through them, and it doesn't block them. So metal is, and lead, and like to a lesser extent reinforced wood, is pretty, it's like the worst thing to use for EMP protection because it just passes straight through it. And so yeah, moving on, a similar note, light alloy is also an interesting block. It's similar to metal in many ways. It's like exactly the same cost, but it sacrifices some durability, so it's got 5 less armor and somewhat less health, to be buoyant and to be light. So this is, out of these main blocks you see up here, it is the lightest one. So it's got, it is about, 1/8 the mass of metal and about half the mass of wood. It is the most buoyant block, structural block that you can possibly have. And so that's its main job. It is reasonably tough, and it's light, and it floats very well. It floats better than wood, so you tend to use this for either craft, which need to be super light, like aircraft and airships and stuff like that. It's also good for decks, because like if the whole deck floats naturally, it helps keep your ships stable and upright and stops them from sinking, which is bad for a ship. And yeah, so that's quite a useful block. Not usually that good for main armor, simply because metal costs exactly the same and is quite a bit tougher, and doesn't actually compromise your buoyancy that much because its buoyancy is almost neutral. So yeah, and last on this particular list is heavy armor, and its main job is just to be really damn tough, but it is very expensive and very heavy. So you'll see here it has like ridiculously huge amounts of health, so compare that to metal, 350 health, armor 40. It has 1250 health for just a 1 by 1 by 1 meter block, armor of 60, weight of 200. It weighs, let's see, it weighs 5 times as much as metal, if I'm doing my math right. EMP susceptibility is 100%, and EMP damage reduction is 1 per meter, so heavy armor has this weird role when it comes to EMP proofing, in that it does block EMP, but unlike wood and stone, it gets damaged by it. So that 1000 EMP damage missile we were talking about earlier will do 1000 damage to a heavy armor block if it hits it. But, well, it will do like 999 damage, really, or something like that, because the EMP damage reduction does still work. But it doesn't work that much. So heavy armor is this kind of double-edged sword. It's like, okay, whatever you armor this with is going to be very, very tough, but it's going to be very heavy, and it's going to get a brand new vulnerability to EMP that you will not have if you use other structural blocks. So that is its strengths and weaknesses, basically. So it's very good for armoring very vital bits of your craft, say the firing pieces of main turrets, for your AI compartments, especially for your ammo compartments. And I tend to find it works better the less of it you use. It's a common mistake for new players to just go nuts on the heavy armor, but that tends to mean that your craft sink very easily and are also very expensive, and they get melted by EMP weapons, so that's not so good. So that is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 main true structural blocks, I guess you could call them. Still not counting ERA because that's really terrible. It's overpriced and just not good. But yeah, so we're gonna move on to the armor types, or I guess structural blocks that aren't technically structural blocks because they don't confer armor stacking. And so we'll start with applique panels, or applique, I guess you could pronounce it. You'll notice these things do not grant armor stacking, and that's because they have air gap included on them. So if we go here, you'll notice that they kind of are half material, but also half empty space. So yeah, that is a particular quirk of them. It means I can't really stack AC with the blocks in front of them. And but looking at its stats, it's got low health. So if you look at the health of it, it's very low. It's lower than wood, actually. But its armor value is second only to heavy armor, which means that it's good ablative armor. It's cheap, it's disposable, and it just kind of soaks up damage, especially explosions, because explosions tend to be pretty bad against things with heavy, with high armor class. So if you say cover the outside of your craft in these things, or even fill whatever gaps you have inside it with applique panels, it actually helps a lot, because these things just eat up a lot of more damage than you might think. It takes quite high AP the weapons in order to like kill this like quickly and render it useless. So yeah, it is quite useful. It also does not have particularly good buoyancy, but it is quite light, so it's a little bit weird in that way. So if you make something entirely out of applique panels, it's not going to float on its own. However, flying things can use applique panels as well, because it's also good for things that might take the occasional hit, but probably aren't going to take that many hits if they're doing their job right. So things like aircraft, things like drones, small things that dodge a lot of shots. And it's good armoring against flak, because flak is particularly weak against armor, and this has a lot of it. So it is quite decent for that. So it's for... yeah, so it's good for aerodynamics. It also reduces drag a lot more than other blocks do. It's cheap damage soaking and filling up gaps for extra protection, so that's good, nice. And then we get to truss blocks, which I never use, I gotta say, and I gotta get out of that habit, which are interesting because it's mostly empty space. It's very light, it's cheap, it's aerodynamic, and it's mainly good for stuff that needs to be light. So it is a fifth the weight of alloy, so this is incredibly light. So you can, if you make something mostly out of truss blocks, the thing can fly with just like a single like balloon block over in the air section. So it is incredibly light, and that's basically its main job. It's also very slightly buoyant. So I never really use it because its health is abysmally bad. It's got even less health than applique panels. But again, like if you're making something that needs to be as light as possible and also needs to be really aerodynamic, you could do a lot worse than use truss blocks for that. And next on the list is glass. And glass is interesting. Its main job is to be see-through. So that has an aesthetic function because it means that you can create a nice window for your character avatar to see through, but it's also functional because over here in the detection component section, visual cameras can see through that. So that's the camera gimbal tracker, the 90-degree camera, the 360 camera, the retroreflection sensor, the coincidence rangefinders, telescope gimbal trackers, and also the laser rangefinder. They can all see through glass, and also as a side note, they can see through portholes as well. So, actually, wait, what's this thing? They can't see through deck pulls. That's weird. But yeah, so it does have that functionality. It's also a lot tougher than it used to be. It's got decent buoyancy. It's got actually the same buoyancy as wood, which is kind of weird. I usually don't think of glass as being quite floaty. It's got decent armor. It's got only slightly less armor than lightweight alloy, actually, so it tends to resist exploding things quite well. It's got less health than wood, though, but it also reduces EMP as much as wood or stone does, so it's interesting. You could potentially build something entirely out of glass and have it be somewhat functional, except as it's not a true structural block, it doesn't actually have, it doesn't get any benefit from armor stacking, and it doesn't give any armor stacking. And I should also mention, this is also where you find the window blocks. So here they are, they're just glass panels. And so yeah, and last of all we have rubber. And rubber has exactly one job, and that is no collision damage is given or received by this material, which is great for putting on the prow of your ships, so in case they run into land, they don't destroy themselves. I keep forgetting to do that with my ships because I'm a dum-dum, I guess. But that is basically all it is. It also has a very low radar and sonar signature. So again, looking at detection, there's radar and sonar trackers and detectors, and rubber is happens to have quite a low radar and sonar signature. Also, alloy has quite a low radar and sonar signature as well. So rubber is actually quite good for covering submarines in, because it lowers their sonar signature, but it also means that if they crash into underwater terrain, they don't take damage. So that's quite nice. And so yeah, it's useful for stealth, and it's also, but it's mainly good for crash protection. It is lousy in any other respect. It does have a little bit of buoyancy, but it's got terrible amounts of health. It's got less armor than wood does, and it's got less health as well. And it's heavier, so pretty terrible otherwise. And yeah, so this is where I go onto the structural efficiency formula, which is something that I've made up entirely, and disclaimer, it's not a perfect it's not a perfect, where the hell did I hide it? Here we go. Gotta find the right notepad thing. So, all this formula is something that who I freely admit am not usually good at math, made up to kind of calculate the structural efficiency of structural blocks and armor. So, yeah, all this is determining what kind of materials are overall best or bad for making the majority of your craft out of. It's not a hard and fast rule, because all of them have their uses, and you can find uses for all of them, but this is just a good rule of thumb for demonstrating like which ones are most useful and the ones you should probably use the most often. So, the formula is as such, and future me, do not forget to put this on screen. It is the health plus buoyancy plus protective EMP drainage minus the weight and minus the EMP susceptibility of a block times its armor class, then all of that divided by its cost. And with that you get the overall structural efficiency score. And this is a new addition that I added the other day. If the block does not have the armor stacking feature, as in it can't give or receive the armor stacking bonus, that's minus 1,000 points, because otherwise you'll get certain blocks like Applique just getting wildly high scores, which don't actually reflect the way they're generally used. And so we're gonna go from highest ranking to lowest. So I should mention that for the following numbers I'm using the stats from the 4-meter beam variants of all these blocks, because this is as good a point as any to mention that when building your craft, it is better to use the longer beams for two reasons. Firstly, it'll save your CPU a headache, because that'll be overall less blocks for your computer to calculate, and you're less likely to get lag or crashes or stuff like that. Pretty pragmatic. But also, beams get bonus health. So you see, you have the 1 by 1 by 1 meter wooden block there, health of 180. The 2 meter wooden block is slightly more than twice the health of the 1 meter. And that's because it has 10% extra health from being a 2 meter beam. And plus 15% for being a 3 meter one, and plus 20% for being a 4 meter beam. So, use bigger beams whenever possible, and I have calculated the following numbers using the 4-meter beams because, quite frankly, those are the ones you're probably going to be using the most often, unless you're very, very deliberately trying to keep things small. So, without further ado, here are the rankings with the formula I mentioned before. Sitting pretty right at the top is metal, which is surprising because the old formula, the last time I calculated this before the armor changes, metal was not at the top, with a score of 3,026. No, 3,000. Yeah, 3,026. I just read that wrong. So this very accurately reflects how metal is most often used, because most things are going to use metal simply because it has that beautiful sweet spot of being having almost neutral buoyancy, having decent armor class, and also having decent health, and not being too expensive. And all that put together creates this number of over 3,000, which is the highest out of these 11 things that I've just shown you. And coming in second is light alloy, with a score of 2,713.2, which again reflects its overall usefulness because it's really buoyant, it's got decent health, decent armor, it's not prohibitively expensive, it's way more expensive than some things, and it is situational. It's not the workhorse of armor like metal is. It's used more sparingly and more specifically, but in general, like, if you want something light or buoyant, you're going to be using a bunch of alloy, most likely. So it deserves its place in second place. And then surprisingly, and I was surprised by this when I calculated it and started questioning my formula a bit until I thought about it some more, number 3 is heavy armor, with a score of 2,679.72, which is weird because as I said before, a heavy armor usually is more effective the less you use of it because it is expensive and it is heavy and is going to compromise how your craft performs a lot if you overdo it. And I thought, I was like, hang on, do I need to tweak this formula a bit because this doesn't seem right? And then I remembered, generally yes, the idea is to use only as much heavy armor as you need and no more than that, but there are exceptions to every rule in From the Depths. And there are some incredibly formidable craft in the Nita campaign and that people have made that are mostly made out of heavy armor, and it pays off really well. And I will spawn in an example of that right now. They tend to be Grey Talon and Scarlet Dawn, like the harder ones. So let's go here, and we're going to spawn in my new favorite thing to hate, which is the Goshawk. And it's ironically, if you make something that floats, that doesn't work so well, but if you make something that flies, actually works quite well. And you look in here, so let's go here so you can see, the Goshawk has basically got so much heavy armor, like, really, like, I think, yeah, it's just here, nope, never mind, there's more heavy armor on top. This thing is almost entirely cased in a shell of it. In fact, Deacon's hell, this is like, I haven't actually looked at the insides of this thing, but this is spectacularly tough. This is like, really, like, if I hadn't seen this thing in action, I would be looking at this thinking, what on earth am I looking at here? Because the Goshawk, if you have been lucky enough not to run into it yet, is an incredibly dangerous front-side aircraft that is evasive, has really good firepower, because look at all this. This is all... come on now. This is all railgun. This is essentially a big flying railgun covered in heavy armor, and that's all it really needs to be. But yeah, this is an example of a craft that uses mostly heavy armor, and it does just fine. It performs quite well, simply because if you do manage to hit the damn thing, you better hit it really hard, because there's so much heavy armor surrounding it that odds are good you're not going to hurt it that much. So, getting back to the point, so, like, that's why heavy armor, I think, can sit quite snug at its score of 3rd place. And then coming in 4th is, surprise, surprise, Applique Panels, or Applique, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, with a score of 2,627.5, which would be 1,000 points more than that, except no armor stacking. So, it loses 1,000 points for that and puts it at number 4, because this is just the kind of, this is good afterthought armor. Just if you have a particular spot that perhaps needs a little bit of extra protection, or if you just got an empty gap which tends to get shot at a lot, you just fill it with applique and it'll do the job just nicely. So it is all around useful in that way. It's just, if you've got a spot, an empty spot, a clear spot, you can slap some applique down there and it usually helps. So yeah, that's where it's at. And number 5, weirdly enough, is Stone, with a score of 2,266, and that's mostly because it's got some really good ratio of health and armor and cost. I think its lack of buoyancy and lack of health compared to other things, or lack of armor compared to other things, does hurt its chances a little bit. But yeah, overall, I don't use Stone that much. One of its main purposes is that if you want a really secure AI compartment, what you do is that you get heavy armor. I'm just going to hit backspace right now, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 3, 1, 2, 3. 3. Okay, so we've got a heavy armor compartment, and we've got an AI in here, for instance. And so this already is pretty EMP proof, because you'll need to destroy the heavy armor beams before you can EMP the thing properly. But if you surround this in stone, which is pretty durable already, what that means is that EMP actually cannot reach the heavy armor, because it's blocked. It is actually completely blocked by the stone here, so that is super convenient, and it works very well. So we go here, here, and then you do 1, 2, 3, and whoop! And this is, it's quite big, and it's costs a bit of space to do this, but this is an incredibly safe AI mainframe. So yeah, for tricks like that, a stone does do quite well, sitting at number 5. And aforementioned thing is that stone tends to get used in tournaments a lot, because of that kind of sweet spot it's in of being reasonably tough, reasonably cheap, and also EMP proof. And so this isn't a perfect formula, I should mention. Like, there are certain contexts where some blocks get wildly more useful than others. And next down on the list is, at number 6, Reinforced Decking. So, similar reasons to stone just being an all-round thing, is at a score of 2,163.8. And, yeah, now then wood is just below that, with a score of 2,069.6. And the reason that wood is now down at number 7 is because even though it is cheap and it does float and it does block EMP, it's really flimsy. So a wood beam has 864 health and 8 armor, and that's just like the formula that I'm using puts a lot of value on armor, which I think is fair because armor is, you know, really helpful and is the main point of armor. But when you compare it to something like metal, which has 40, like, just wood tends to suffer a lot because of its lack of armor. Like, explosions and fragmentation they love wooden things. They chew straight through them so fast, which is why the Deepwater Guard is such fun to fight, because you even sneeze at them and they explode. So yeah, that's what wood is. And then glass is dropped down considerably in terms of score at number 8, a score of 855.83. Yes, we skipped the 1000s, we're down to the hundreds. And that's because it's lost 1,000 points thanks to lack of armor stacking, and also because it's got worse health than wood does. So yeah, it's like the lack of health does limit its overall usability, especially as armor. And then down the list further, and again due to lack of health, is the Trust block. So a score of 526.625, and same deal really. It is super light, it is buoyant, and it does have decent armor, but it has so little health. It has less health than glass. Like, I think it's got the lowest health of anything over here. Well, yeah, it's on par with ERA, which is terrible. Actually, no. We're not really going to talk about the plates, because the plates are, like, pretty much 100% decorative. Their health is so terrible, it's not even worth talking about. Also, these things are clever connecting things that I didn't really think to talk about. So I'm not going to. What else? Alright, so the Trust block is already, we're getting down into lower numbers, but Lead really lets the team down. Where is Lead? Lead is over here. So Lead, let's stare right at this guilty Lead. Lead has a score of 4.3, because you'll remember in this formula, it's plus buoyancy, which if it's a negative number is minus buoyancy, and health doesn't have super good health or armor, but its buoyancy just really hurts its usefulness. Like I said before, the main purpose of Lead is to be heavy, is as ballast, and if you're using it for anything other than that, you're probably doing it wrong, because there's so many other things that do that job better. Like, just in terms of, like, armor and structural integrity. But, and you probably already figured this out, the absolute lowest score on this thing that I've measured is Rubber. It has a score of negative 534.25. And the reason for that is its armor. It has the worst armor of basically anything in this menu, except for the light block, which I forgot to talk about too. I don't consider that armor. That's just like a block. But yeah, so if you look at Rubber, it's got terrible health. It's got less health than wood. And it's got really terrible armor. And it's just, yeah, it's like, Rubber is like, again, it is like Lead. It is a specialized block. It has one job. Exactly one job. And it's really good at that job. And it is pretty much horrible at everything else. So it's collision proofing, and with a secondary use of, like, basically, well, stealth, like from radar and from radar and sonar. But so yeah, it's like, it's really like not something you should use for anything other than that. So yeah, that's basically the structural efficiency formula, and it's a good thing to keep around in case people start modding extra structural blocks in. I will be using that formula to calculate how overpowered or underpowered or useful that is. But yeah, this is not foolproof formula, it's just giving you a rough idea of what you should use most often. Metal and alloy tend to be the things you use the most, and lead and rubber is the thing you're probably going to use the least. So yeah, and now let's talk about some good armoring practices, and I guess some more advanced stuff. So yeah, so one of the weird things about From the Depths is that you would not think that empty space makes good armor, but you would be wrong. So basically air gaps are good when you're creating armor, and this is where we get to fire this big gun, by the way. It's good for dealing with specialized APS shells, like shape charges, and time after impact shells, and particularly big explosions, because the way explosions, for instance, work in From the Depths is that they get weaker the further away you are, and they get more powerful in tight spaces. So if you have, say, a cram shell that does 1000 HE damage with a radius of like 20 meters, at the edge of that radius it's gonna do, it's not going to do 1000 damage, it'll do considerably less than that. It does the most damage right at the epicenter of the explosion. So if you have something like this, so if you have a big air gap and you get a real monster explosion like that happens right here, So let's actually test that, because I have an explosion tool. Got 10,000, so we go here. If I have something like this, and I should probably armor up that thing a little better. Let's set this to 5 meters. And if I do this... Okay, let's set that a little bit higher. Let's set that to 15 meters. What happens? 35 meters. Explosions also tend to get blocked by things. Let's, actually, let's do this. Let's do... Oh, you idiot. That's why it wasn't working. My bad. My B. So, if we go here, and if we blow up that double layer of blocks, you will notice that we have damaged the blocks behind it. So we got... not by much, thankfully. 2 layers of metal is good at stopping big explosions. But we have definitely scratched this one beam right here. It's at 99% health now. So, if we repair this thing, and if we pull it into and out of play to get this thing's health back up. See, it's back there. And if we just take this thing a little bit further away, remembering that the... radius of this explosion is artificially low. So there it's 10, and bang. Ta-da! Simple principle. So this is like 8 meters away, and so it's pretty simple. If the thing that gets hit by the explosive is a long way away from the next thing does not take damage from the explosion. So that's one way that air gaps are quite useful. And it also doubles as flotation compartment, so if you've got a big empty space in a ship or an airship, you can stick, I can't actually select it, you can stick an air pump in it to provide buoyancy, or if it's an airship or a regular ship, you can stick helium pumps in it, so it pulls double duty as buoyancy and protection. And yeah, I should talk about heat, because a heat is useful like this. So, we're going to swap out the head of the shell with a big shape charge head, and we're going to set that to a very high penetration metric. And we're going to set this very thick, and we're going to see if we get through that. So, this is very overly thick armor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I wonder if we're going to be able to get through that. Whoops, I have a thing. Oh, here we go. Clear clips. We've got that big shape charge in there. And... fire. Yep. So, heat shells are definitely something to worry about, because, they really do not care how thick your armor is. Particularly if it's, a really big shell. So you will notice that this isn't even a particularly strong heat shell, because it's got no HE warheads backing it up. So you see the stats down there of the frag count and the damage particularly. Whoop! It just got a lot stronger thanks to that. So how do you deal with heat? Well, the simplest way is just chuck an air gap in the middle there. So we go here, 1, 2, 3, and we're just going to pull this into and out. Actually, Goshawk, go away, I don't like you. There we go, and do this, so all our stuff has full health. And this is a thinner wall of armor than we had before, so I wonder what's going to happen. Ta-da! Air gaps to the rescue. And you'll notice that this metal beam just took a lot of damage from that. It's 20% health, 80% of its health just got knocked clean off. However, there is a way to mitigate even that. You just make the air gap even bigger. So we go here, this is a big honking air gap, 1, 2, 3, 4. And how much damage is going to happen now, do you think? Considerably less. In fact, like, let's go over here. What got damaged? Almost nothing, really. Actually, yeah. Wait a minute. Aha! So 93%, 78%, 75%, 75%. So, having a big air gap in your designs is it's probably the best heat defense you will ever get, because what happens is that, and let us do this in super slow motion, so watch the seagulls, they're going so slow motion, and we're gonna wait a long time over here for the thing to fire. Wait for it. You might need to speed this up in post, future BorderWise, because it's gonna take a while. So you see that. Fragments, be they from heat or HESH or just regular frags, will spread out the further they travel. And when they spread out, they don't all land on the same block, and that's very useful, because it means instead of one completely destroyed block, that is potentially the only one keeping your explodey squishy bits safe, you get a whole bunch of slightly damaged blocks, which are still doing their job of being armor. So, very good move to make. And also, if you actually want some extra protection, you remember me harping on about applique panels? This is one of the ways they are super useful. So, go here, and you just fill this gap with applique panels, because now this is like, this is still going to stop the heat quite nicely. And it actually didn't even get as far as it managed before. These metal beams are still safe, and applique is cheap and nasty. This is 8 materials, a metal beam is 20. So, we've just lost 2 of them. That's still a better loss to have than a metal beam. So yeah, applique is good for this, but also you can use slopes. So if you want to go there, you can use slopes or pole blocks, which technically are not full blocks. So looking at that, it's like that. So if you do this, it also can stop heat. Doesn't work so well against HESH for some reason. Possibly because thump damage can still travel through them. So if you do this, and particularly heavy armor poles tend to be quite good for this. So if we go here, you'll see here, this should work. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to be embarrassed. Yep, it worked a treat. So this is a pretty decent armor scheme, simply because you've got this stacked layer of metal, and you've got this super tough air gap right here. Because the stats on these are still nothing to sneeze at. They're not quite as strong as a regular 4-meter beam, but they still have a lot of armor and a lot of health, which means that even if this layer of metal is blown away, that heavy armor pole section is going to take a lot of punishment before it goes. Once it is, however, going there, it's worth showing what happens when that goes, because I think this might... Yep. So, if it hits the pole directly, it will pass straight through it. So, worth noting, you can't just make your entire vehicle out of poles and expect to have a good time. It's also worth mentioning that HESH is, acts a little bit differently from heat. So, instead of the shape charge head, we're going to use the squash head. Clear clips, and same armor scheme, go over here. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. You'll notice that just took a lot of damage. So yeah, that is probably not the best thing. And also, same story as before, if it hits the poles directly, it's probably just going to go straight through it. It doesn't. But yeah, HESH I'm probably going to need to do a follow-up talking about heat and HESH. But yeah, so the short version is air gaps are a good idea, use them whenever possible. And the other thing that's a good idea is sloped blocks. So, those of you who are tank nerds, I know you're out there, will probably already know that sloped armor is a very good idea. And for everybody else, I'm here to tell you that sloped armor is a very good idea. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to transform this thing magically back into a sabot shell through the power of mouse clicking. And I'm going to halve the gauge. And we got a shell that I have been doing tests with before. So, remember this number. So it's 848 KD and an AP value of 39.1. And basically the way that slopes interact with projectiles from the devs, and this is actually quite in-depth, and it's a shame we don't get the opportunity to use this more often because we get inertially few shells flying around, we get heat and HESH and hollow points and stuff that does not care about sloped armor at all, and so it is a bit of a shame it doesn't get to be seen more often, but it is quite a handy thing to know of and make use of whenever handy. Slopes take reduced kinetic damage from the slope angle and then plus armor stacking. So, basically all slopes, and I'm just going to demonstrate this with metal slopes, is they have a specific angle. So a 1 meter slope has a 45 degree angle, a 2 meter slope has a 26 degree angle, a 3 meter slope has an 18 degree angle, and a 4 meter slope has a 14 degree angle. So the longer the slope, the steeper the angle, so to speak. And the steeper the angle, the less damage gets taken. So if we assume a shell comes in perfectly horizontal, so a fast sabot, for example, then the damage multiplier versus the slope is sin 26 equals 0.44x damage dealt, and that's for a 2 meter slope. Sin 18 equals 0.31x damage dealt, that's for a 3 meter slope. And sin 14 equals 0.24x damage dealt for a 4 meter slope. So basically, 4 meter slopes take way less damage. So less than a quarter damage from kinetic weapons. So that is a handy thing to know. So I am going to read out some numbers to you now, and I'm going to demonstrate 2 of them. So, with our shell that, remember, is 848 kinetic damage with 39.1 AP, this shell does 553 damage to a 1 meter HA beam, and then against a 2, 3, and 4 meter HA beam, HA being heavy armor, it does 461 damage, and that is because of armor stacking. So, mentioned armor stacking before, this works on single blocks as well. So a 2 meter block orientated this way stacks with itself, which is, again, it's a handy thing to know. So we're going to go here, we're going to place our heavy armor block, and we are going to pay attention to the top right hand corner where you see the damage numbers. So wait for it. So you'll see that number up there is 553. That is an important number. Then we go here, and we go here, and we test it again, and 461. So less damage has been taken because this block is stacking with itself, but armor stacking only stacks to a depth of 2. So in the old days, where you could stack armor up to 8 layers, what would happen then is like you just have massive layers of armor, and a 4 meter beam orientated this way would have an armor stacking of 4, as opposed to a 2 meter beam which would have an armor stacking of 2. But to these days, it still only goes up to 2. So damage number is 461 again. Now, compare that to, and keep in mind, this is a 4 meter beam, which is a big expensive lump. We've got a 1 meter HA slope there, so smallest of the slopes. And damage number is 390. So already, this thing has no armor stacking whatsoever, but it's already taken less damage from that, admittedly not fantastic kinetic shell, but still hefty. It's already taken less damage from that than a 4 meter beam. You stick slopes in the right places, it will save your bacon considerably. But it is worth noting, though, that slopes do not do anything against certain types of damage, including kinetic thump damage. So if we replace this with a hollow point, we go here, and that'll do. And let's pay attention to the damage numbers. Go here, test, and remember the number in the top right corner, 460. Wait, no, I didn't clear the clip. Damn it. Damn it. Let's try that again. So we got hollow points in there. Yes, we do. So we go here, test, look at the damage number, 231 thump damage. Replace that with a slope. So remember, 231, 231. It's got a slope. 231 again. So armor slopes are very useful in certain contexts, but against a lot of other damage types, they do basically nothing. They do not reduce the damage from explosions, they don't reduce the damage from chemical shells at all, and they do not reduce thump damage that you get from APS shells and missiles and particle cannons and stuff like that. And that is, believe it or not, the basics of armoring. There is definitely stuff I've missed. If there's anything else you'd want to know about armor, please ask away in the comments below, and I will get on that. So, on that note, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Support me on Patreon or through YouTube membership if you like. It really helps. Thank you to all my current supporters, and I will see you next time in From the Depths. Farewell.